Say you take a walk through any suburban backyard garden today, and you'll see the usual suspects: tomatoes, zucchini, maybe some lettuce if the gardener is feeling adventurous. But a few decades ago, you'd have seen that American backyards have hosted some truly bizarre crops. From vegetables that look like they arrived on a spaceship to roots that could be mistaken for alien larvae. These strange plants challenge everything we think we know about what belongs in a garden. Some were grown out of necessity by families maintaining old-world food traditions. Others were the experiments of curious gardeners willing to try anything that might grow. Stick around, because I'm going to show you 20 of the weirdest crops ever grown in American backyards. Plants so strange they make Brussels sprouts look downright conventional. Let's get into it. Romanesco broccoli. The first time you see a Romanesco broccoli, your brain will likely struggle to process what you're looking at. This isn't just unusual, it's geometrically impossible, a vegetable that appears to have been designed by a mathematician on hallucinogens. Romanesco looks more like a prop from a science fiction film than something you'd put on a dinner plate. Italian in origin, it made its way to American gardens through immigrant families who refused to give up their traditional vegetables. The plant grows like standard broccoli or cauliflower, but produces these alien-looking chartreuse pinnacles that make visitors stop and stare. What's remarkable is that this isn't some modern genetic engineering. Romanesco has been grown in Italy since the 16th century, though it only reached American gardens in recent decades. The fractal patterns follow mathematical principles known as Fibonacci sequences, in which each spiral contains precisely calculated proportions. But beyond its shocking appearance, Romanesco actually tastes milder and nuttier than regular broccoli, with a slightly firmer texture. Kohlrabi. If vegetables could be designed by committee, with everyone throwing in random ideas, you'd end up with kohlrabi. This bizarre brassica grows a swollen stem above ground that looks like a turnip decided to grow on a stick, with leaves sprouting from it at odd angles, like antennae on some vegetable UFO. The bulb can be green, purple, or white, depending on variety, and the whole thing looks fundamentally wrong, like a plant that forgot how to be a plant. German immigrants brought kohlrabi to American gardens, where it confused neighbors who had never seen anything like it. The name literally means cabbage turnip in German, which doesn't really help explain what you're supposed to do with it. You eat the swollen stem, peeling away the tough outer layer to reveal crisp, sweet flesh that tastes like a mild, slightly sweet broccoli stem. It grows fast, thriving in cool weather, which made it practical for spring and fall gardens. But its appearance kept it from catching on widely. Oca. These small, brightly colored tubers look like miniature deformed potatoes that have been dipped in paint. Oca tubers come in vivid shades of pink, orange, yellow, and red, often with contrasting patterns that make them look more like decorative beads than food. Native to the Andes, OCA made a strange journey to American gardens through adventurous seed catalogs and the curiosity of experimental growers. What makes oca truly weird is its flavor, tangy and almost lemony, nothing like the neutral starchiness of potatoes. This sourness comes from oxalic acid, the same compound in rhubarb leaves, though in much lower, perfectly safe concentrations. The tubers need exposure to sunlight after harvest to develop their full sweetness, a process called curing that reduces the acid content. Gardeners who tried growing OCA often found it challenging because it requires short days to form tubers, meaning it wouldn't produce until late fall, when days shortened considerably. Salsify might win the prize for most misleadingly named vegetable ever grown in American gardens. This long white root was marketed as oyster plant because, supposedly, when cooked properly, it tastes like oysters. It doesn't, not even remotely. But the name stuck, and adventurous gardeners planted it anyway, hoping to harvest some kind of landlocked seafood miracle. What they got instead was a root that looks like a dirty, hairy parsnip that's seen better days. The plant sends up tall stems with grass-like leaves and produces lovely purple or yellow flowers, depending on the variety. But underground is where things get weird. The taproots can grow 2 feet long, pale beige, and covered in fine rootlets that make them look like they should be living in soil permanently, not on a dinner plate. Salsify was more popular in the 19th and early 20th centuries, grown in gardens where every inch of space needed to produce food. Today, it's nearly forgotten, occasionally showing up in heirloom seed catalogs where it's described with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for vegetables nobody actually grows anymore. Crosnes. These tiny segmented tubers look exactly like something that would make most people scream and grab a shovel to kill. Crosnes, also called Chinese artichokes, resemble fat, pale grubs or segmented caterpillars with distinct rings that make them look disturbingly insect-like. They're small, usually about the size of your thumb, and the fact that they're edible seems like information your brain refuses to accept. French and Chinese immigrants occasionally grew crosnes in American gardens, though never in large quantities because harvesting them is tedious and they don't store well. The plants are actually mints, spreading aggressively through underground rhizomes and producing these strange tubers at the tips of their roots. The flavor is mild, slightly nutty and sweet, with a crunchy texture similar to water chestnuts. But the appearance problem remains significant. The few American gardeners who grew them tended to be serious food experimenters, the kind of people who would try anything once and weren't bothered by food that looked disturbing as long as it tasted good. Rambutan. In the warmest corners of American backyards, particularly in southern Florida and parts of Hawaii, adventurous growers have coaxed this bizarre tropical fruit to produce. Rambutan looks like something H.R. Geiger designed for a nature film, bright red or yellow fruits covered in soft, fleshy spines that make them resemble sea urchins or extremely hairy lychees. The name comes from the Malay word for hair, which is apt because these fruits look aggressively fuzzy. Growing rambutan in American backyards was always an ambitious project requiring specific conditions: tropical heat, high humidity, and protection from any cold snaps. The trees themselves are attractive, with glossy leaves and clusters of fruits hanging like strange ornaments. Breaking open a rambutan reveals translucent whitish flesh similar to a grape or lychee, sweet and slightly floral. What made rambutan weird in American gardens wasn't just its appearance, but its sheer impracticality. Most of the country couldn't grow it at all, and even in suitable climates, trees took years to bear fruit. But for Southeast Asian immigrant families, rambutan represented a taste of home or a horticultural achievement worth bragging about. Burdock Root burdock produces roots that look less like vegetables and more like something you'd pull out of a medieval dungeon floor. These brown, dirt-encrusted roots look like they should be supporting trees, not ending up on dinner plates. Yet Japanese and other Asian immigrant families regularly grew burdock, called gobo, in American gardens. The challenge with burdock was the digging. These roots didn't want to come out of the ground. Gardeners needed to dig wide, deep holes around the plants, loosening soil for a foot or more before attempting to pull roots that still often broke partway up. What emerged looked like something between a root and a club earth covered and primitive. Once cleaned and peeled, burdock revealed pale flesh that needed to be cooked almost immediately to prevent browning. The flavor is earthy and slightly sweet with a texture that ranges from tender to chewy depending on preparation. Burdock was valued in traditional Asian medicine and cuisine, which is why families continued growing it despite the difficulty. But to American neighbors unfamiliar with the plant, it was baffling. Earthnut Pea. Also known as hopness or groundnut, this Native American plant produces two crops that made it weird: beautiful pea-like flowers above ground and knobby potato-like tubers below. The tubers grow on strings of underground runners, looking like beads on a necklace if beads were lumpy, tan, and tasted like potatoes with a nutty flavor. Native Americans cultivated these plants for centuries, and early colonists relied on them during lean times. But by the 20th century, earthnut peas had largely disappeared from cultivation, replaced by conventional potatoes that were easier to grow and harvest. The few families who maintained tradition or experimented with native crops would plant these climbing vines and wait for the tubers to develop, a process that took patience. The tubers were small, requiring more digging and cleaning than potatoes, but they had one major advantage: incredible nutritional density, with 3 times the protein of potatoes. What made them weird in modern gardens was that nobody knew what they were anymore. Turkish taro is already strange to many Americans, but Turkish taro took weird to another level. This variety produced enormous elephant ear leaves that could grow several feet across, dominating whatever corner of the garden they occupied. The corms underground were bulbous and irregular, looking like misshapen rocks covered in fibrous skin. Pacific Islander and Southeast Asian families maintaining food traditions grew taro, though some adventurous gardeners tried it simply because it looked so dramatic. The plants needed consistent moisture and warm temperatures, thriving in the kind of humid summer heat that made most people retreat to air conditioning. The corms contained calcium oxalate crystals that could cause intense mouth irritation if not properly cooked. They needed extended boiling or steaming to break down these compounds into something edible. Once properly prepared, the corms became starchy and mild, similar to potatoes, but denser and slightly mucilaginous. But the entire process, from growing these massive plants to carefully processing the corms to avoid poisoning yourself, seemed like an extraordinary effort for a vegetable that most Americans had never heard of: sea kale. Sea kale looks like a cabbage that got seriously confused about its life choices. This perennial produces thick stems topped with large, wavy blue-green leaves that look more like succulents than vegetables. In spring, it sends up stalks with beautiful white or pink flowers, making it look ornamental. But sea kale was grown for those thick stems, which were blanched by covering the plants in spring to keep the emerging shoots pale and tender. Growing sea kale was an old European tradition that occasionally showed up in American gardens. The plant was native to coastal areas and adapted to salty conditions and poor soil, making it hardy and reliable once established. But harvesting required work. In early spring, gardeners would pile soil, straw, or purpose-built covers over the plants to exclude light. This forced the emerging stems to grow pale and tender, lacking the toughness and bitterness they develop in sunlight. After a few weeks, the covers would be removed, and the blanched stems would be cut and cooked, usually boiled or steamed like asparagus. The flavor was mild, slightly bitter, and nothing that would make most Americans abandon familiar vegetables. Cardoon imagines celery, but make it giant, aggressive, and covered in spines. That's cardoon, a Mediterranean vegetable that looks like it was designed to defend itself from harvest. The plant produces gorgeous purple thistle-like flowers that confirm its relationship to artichokes, but cardoon was grown for its stems, thick leaf stalks that needed extensive preparation to become edible. Italian and Spanish immigrant families occasionally grew cardoon in American gardens, though space requirements meant it was always a major commitment. Harvesting was hazardous, requiring gloves and care to avoid the spines. The stems were tough and bitter when raw, requiring blanching similar to sea kale, then extensive cooking to become tender. They'd be boiled for hours, then often breaded and fried or baked with cheese and cream. The flavor was similar to artichokes, earthy and slightly bitter, which made sense given their relationship. But the ratio of effort to reward made cardoon impractical for most American gardeners. It required too much space, too much work, and produced a vegetable that few Americans recognized or wanted. Cucamelon. These tiny fruits look like someone hit watermelons with a shrink ray and forgot to turn it off. Cucamelons are grape-sized, striped like miniature watermelons, and grow on delicate vines that seem too fragile to support even these tiny fruits. Native to Mexico and Central America, cucamelons occasionally appeared in American gardens through specialty seed catalogs that targeted adventurous growers. What made cucamelons weird wasn't just their appearance, but the disconnect between how they looked and how they tasted. You'd expect watermelon flavor, given the striping. Instead, biting into a cucamelon delivered a cucumber taste with a slight citrus tang. Crunchy and refreshing, but nothing like their watermelon appearance suggested. They were too small to slice for salads, too numerous to pickle individually without losing your mind, and too unusual to have established culinary uses in American cooking. Most gardeners who grew cucamelons picked bowls of them, served them as conversation pieces at parties, and watched guests' confused reactions as watermelon appearance met cucumber reality. Kiwano. If cucamelons looked weird, Kiwano took bizarre to another dimension. These spiky orange melons looked like they should be growing on Mars, covered in prominent horns or spines that made them appear dangerous. Inside, the flesh was bright green and gelatinous, filled with seeds suspended in what looked like lime jello. The entire fruit seemed engineered to confuse anyone who encountered it. Kiwano, also called horned melon or African horned cucumber, occasionally appeared in warm climate American gardens, grown by experimental gardeners or African immigrants maintaining food traditions. The flavor was mild, slightly sweet and tangy, like a combination of cucumber, lime, and banana, though that description makes it sound better than most people found it. The texture was the real issue, slippery and full of seeds that were tedious to work around. Most people who tried Kiwano ate it once out of curiosity, found the experience interesting, but not appealing enough to repeat, and left the fruit to gardeners who had cultural connections to it or who simply enjoyed growing the strangest things possible. Malabar spinach. Malabar spinach isn't spinach. This tropical vine produces thick, succulent leaves on red or green stems that climb enthusiastically, looking more like a decorative houseplant than something you'd eat. The leaves are glossy, almost waxy, and the entire plant has an appearance that suggests it should be grown for looks rather than food. Asian families occasionally grew Malabar spinach in American gardens, training the vines on trellises where they could climb up to 10 feet in a single season. The plant thrived in heat and humidity that would make regular spinach bolt immediately, producing leaves continuously through summer when other greens were impossible to grow. But those leaves were nothing like conventional spinach. They were thick and mucilaginous when cooked, developing a slimy texture similar to okra that made many Americans uncomfortable. The flavor was mild, slightly peppery, perfectly fine, but the texture issue remained divisive. People either didn't mind the sliminess or couldn't get past it. Skirret, these roots look like something that escaped from a nightmare, white, forked, and worm-like, growing in tangled clusters that made harvesting feel like excavating something that should stay buried. Skirret was a medieval European crop that occasionally showed up in American gardens through heirloom enthusiasts or historical garden reconstructions. The plant produced umbels of white flowers similar to carrots or parsnips, but underground was where things got weird. The roots were sweet when cooked, almost sugary, which made them popular in medieval times before sugar was widely available. But their appearance was unfortunate. Multiple thin roots would fork and twist around each other, creating masses that required patient washing and peeling. The roots also had woody cores that needed to be removed, adding to the preparation work. What you ended up with after all that effort was a small amount of sweet, tender root vegetables that most Americans found underwhelming compared to carrots or parsnips that were easier to grow and process. Jerusalem artichoke. These tall plants look like scraggly sunflowers, which they are, growing 8 feet tall or more with bright yellow flowers. But Jerusalem artichokes weren't grown for flowers or seeds. Underground, they produced knobby, irregular tubers that looked like ginger root's misshapen cousin, tan and lumpy with a texture that made them annoying to clean. The name is doubly misleading. They're not from Jerusalem, and they're not artichokes. European settlers found Native Americans growing these tubers and brought them back across the Atlantic, where they became popular in European gardens before returning to America through various immigration waves. The plants were incredibly easy to grow, almost too easy. The tubers had a nutty, slightly sweet flavor when roasted or cooked, and they were nutritious, high in iron and potassium. But they also contained inulin, a carbohydrate that human digestive systems struggle with, leading to gas and digestive discomfort that earned Jerusalem artichokes the unfortunate nickname fartichokes. This side effect, combined with their weedy growth habit and knobby appearance, kept them from widespread popularity, despite occasional rediscovery by health food enthusiasts. Chinese long bean standard. American green beans grow to maybe 6 or 8 inches long. Chinese long beans laughed at such restraint, producing pods that could reach 3 feet or more, dangling from vines like green snakes. These extremely long legumes looked improbable, as if someone had decided beans needed to be dramatically elongated for no good reason. The flavor was similar to regular green beans, but slightly earthier, and the texture was firmer, holding up better to extended cooking. This made them perfect for stir-fries and braises, where regular green beans would turn mushy. But to American neighbors unfamiliar with them, Chinese long beans looked like botanical mistakes, beans that had somehow forgotten to stop growing. The plants were productive and reliable, thriving in summer heat, which made them practical crops for families who wanted them. But the sheer strangeness of seeing 3-foot beans hanging from vines kept them firmly in the ethnic vegetable category for most of American garden history, too weird for mainstream adoption despite being perfectly good vegetables. Mizuna. These delicate greens look like something a Victorian illustrator drew after being told to create the most ornate lettuce possible. Mizuna produces deeply serrated, feathery leaves that seem too fancy to be real, like elaborate garnishes that somehow became an entire plant. The leaves are thin and delicate, light green to purple depending on variety, arranged in rosettes that look decorative first and edible second. Japanese families occasionally grew Mizuna in American gardens, though it remained unknown to most gardeners until relatively recently, when Asian vegetables began appearing in farmers' markets and specialty stores. What made Mizuna weird was that it seemed too delicate to be practical. Those fancy serrated leaves looked like they would bruise if you looked at them wrong. But the plant was actually quite hardy, handling light frosts and growing quickly in cool weather. The flavor was mild and slightly peppery, more interesting than standard lettuce, but not so strong as to be challenging. What kept Mizuna in weird territory was simply unfamiliarity. American gardeners had their lettuces, their spinach, their standard salad greens. Mizuna, with its elaborate leaves, seemed unnecessarily complicated, a vegetable that required explanation. It's like lettuce, but Japanese, didn't quite capture its distinctive appearance or flavor. The few gardeners who grew it appreciated its productivity and cool season reliability, but it remained a specialty crop, the kind of thing you'd find in Asian grocery stores or experimental gardens rather than mainstream American backyards. These 20 crops represent the edges of American backyard gardening, where curiosity, tradition, or sheer determination led people to grow things that made neighbors question their sanity. Which of these weird crops would you be brave enough to try growing? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to leave this video a hype and subscribe to this channel. See you in the next one.